Welcome everyone to episode 13 of Spike Down. My name is LaFortune, and joining me is Gares, and it's playoff time, so that means it's time to dive into the matches, standout players that are heading into playoffs, and of course our predictions. And let's just dive straight into the players. Sean, we had a quick conversation before jumping into this, and we were trying to figure out what players we want to highlight, and we'll just go through the list. We picked 4, and we'll start with the one that's probably on everybody's mind is Qualanoob, and you're really hyping up this kid, and I can see why. He's like, to you, my Redux. That's basically what we're looking at.
Yeah, I think of Koala Noob as like I'm kind of thinking of him as like the GOAT duelist in challengers, in my opinion. Like he's the best
Fair.
overall duelist. And while his stats wouldn't say that in the second split, if you look overall, that's just what he is. And that he has a lot of help by having great initiator play around him, which is honestly so key for duelists. Like you look at like VCT Americas, you look at someone like Osbus, he needs Common Scene. You look at like someone like Artist, he needs someone like Crashies. And you look at Qualadoob and he has like Nismo next to him. Of course he's going to be insane, right? Like he just has the GOAT supporting him. So he's going to look like the GOAT. And that's why I think Qualadoob just has to be praised. Like he will always put up numbers in this team.
Yeah, and you think about the the contrast too. Is you mentioned Nismo, and there's also EU. It's like he's getting 2 of the best initiator flex players, probably in Challenger. It's hard for him not to flourish, and I think there is also a certain level of talent that he has to kind of live up to, and I think he's proven that. Even before Challenger started, like this kid's the real deal, and he's been absolutely destroying this split. From one duelist to the next, Moist Moguls is, if anybody was following us on Twitter, we saw a post where they are first in pretty much every single category imaginable at the end of split 2, which makes sense going 5-0. But these guys have looked deadly, and Sim is right up there. And I'm intrigued to kind of see if Sim can keep this up. Keep in mind, I would say his stats are comparable to Koala's, very similar ACS. His headshot's a bit higher, which tells me he's rifling more than he's opping, which kind of makes sense in the Moist system. I feel like when Sim pulls out an op, they're typically ahead. Wherein, like, if he has the option, like money's tight and he has an option between glass cannon, op, or rifle, I think he normally goes rifle, or Koala might be the opposite. But really talented kid who kind of came out of nowhere real quick.
Dude, that's what I thought too. Like when I first saw Moist like split 1, right? When they qualified in, I was kind of sleeping on them because I didn't know much about Sim, but I quickly became a believer in this kid. Like he is incredible when you watch him. Like he's very raw as a player. That like compared to Koala Noob, I think I'll watch him play a little bit more aggressive and overextend a little bit more, but the plays that this guy makes are insane. He just like takes over games, and I promise you, if you watch a Moist game, he will win single-handedly 3 rounds or like 2 to 3 rounds every game, like pivotal rounds. I see it time and time again. This guy is so good.
Yeah, and you know how you're talking about Koala and his backup cast, he's backed up by the likes of Fly and Brock. So there's an interesting trend of how much does a good initiator translate to a good duelist? And I think there is an interesting balance of threshold of skill and mechanical skill in a duelist, backed up by a comparable utility usage by their support players. And I think Moist and M80 kind of have that perfect balance, but there is obviously that skill that these players have to possess. And I know Sim, he's a grinder. He's been around for a while. Probably less known than I would say Koala in the sense of historically, right? He's more of a Raze Jet mix, so 121 games on Jet on record, 112 Raze. So he's kind of split up his Jet and Raze gameplay. I would say he's come into his own, however, as a main Jet duelist. And I think the meta is kind of back to Jet can play every map now, which I find interesting also, which suits these 2 players specifically.
Yeah, exactly. And to draw a comparison to those that probably don't know a lot about Sim, I would say he is most similar to like Leaf as a Jet main, right? Whereas when I watch Leaf play Jet, he's not going to op a lot. He's going to be very aggressive with a rifle. Like he typically is like playing off of like one initiator's utility a lot, and he makes a lot of plays individually due to like subconscious feelings in the moment and just mass experience, like with reps, right? That's the kind of stuff you'll see when you watch Sim.
And obviously backed up by Flya, their in-game leader, who honestly, I don't know if I want to use the word peaking because we don't really know how good this kid can be. We've seen moments of it in the past, right? When he was on phase for a brief moment. We've seen glimpses of greatness, but the consistency wasn't there. But Split 2 kind of changed that in my mind. I'm like, okay, like Fly is not only the real deal and he's calling, but this dude is just winning everything he does. It feels like he can't do anything wrong. And when you have that feeling about a player, like you can throw him in any situation. If you feel like he's gonna come out on top, it's a weird feeling to have with a player.
Dude, I know exactly what you're saying, right? Like, normally when you watch in-game leaders, myself included, you'll see them have like mental fluffs. Like their
Yep.
crosshair placement won't be that good. Maybe someone will peek them and they'll be a little bit delayed because they'll be looking at their mini map, or like weird stuff happens mechanically when you spectate an in-game leader. But when I spectate Flya, it just seems like he's a very, very solid support player. Like
Yeah.
he is doing everything that he needs to for his team. He's alive in the late rounds, and he's like a fragger too in the in-game leader role, which is
Yeah.
insane. Uh, like you look at the agents he's played, he's the flex player for the team, so he's playing like Viper, Breach, KO, and he just is doing his job in all of these games really, really well. It's not like he's first blooding a lot. It's not like he's, just destroying people off the get go the way Sim is, but he's closing out rounds and he's making really good reads for Moist the entire way through.
Based on what Moist did in Split 2, I don't know. I feel like they might just be kind of smooth sailing for a little bit.
I don't know like who I would favor over Moist other than like maybe like M80 and
No.
maybe like the guard in the rematch without Josh playing. Like, there's
Yeah.
not many teams I would favor over Moist right now. They look really, really solid, and whoever they play in the playoffs, they're gonna give a really hard time. Like, you look at them in the bracket if you're playing against them, and you're probably a little bit scared.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely could agree with that. I would not want to play them. And Nismo, the last guy we pulled up, he has been a rock for M80. No matter what version of Nismo you get, I think you know you're going to get consistency and someone who's a really big team player. And I think he's proven that. I mean, the clutch rate, 75% clutch rate, like what? Like that's just crazy.
If you
Yep.
sort by rating right now throughout all of challengers, Nismo's at 1.22, and Verno is next at 1.16. It's like, or I guess Koala is tied with Verno. So that's pretty insane. Like, I'm not gonna lie, that's actually incredible. The fact that he's doing that while his star duelist is also putting up those numbers
Yep.
is bonkers. Like, how are the kills even? How are there enough kills to go around? Like,
He's
how?
gotta be a trading machine. I feel like whenever you watch Koala go ham, Nismo isn't far behind. Like
Yeah,
he's always lurking. But if Koala's getting 2 to 3 kills around nearly and when they're heating up, it is wild to think, well, how is EU so high rated? Where are those kills coming from? And wait, how is Nismo? It's such a wild balance. He's got to be one of the best support trade fraggers and challengers right now. It
yeah.
feels that way anyway.
That's exactly right. He's the best support trader, right? Because you look at the
Yeah.
agency plays, he's playing like flash initiators, right? He's not playing the info scanning ones. He's playing like Sky, KO, and Breach a lot of the times. And that means he's staying pretty close to the duelist. He's typically like second in,
Mhm.
and he does a really, really good job of trading the kills that Koala like finds for the team. So if Koala gets the entry, he's typically alive in like a great scenario. And if Koala doesn't get the entry, he's typically got a good enough setup and aim to trade the kill and put his team in a good place anyway, which is why M80 is such a good team. Is probably like the combination of those two and EU getting the info.
Yeah, such a cool mix. I can't wait. It looks like we might not get the Moist M80 matchup considering that's all who we've been talking about. Till possibly, I mean, just looking at it, it would be upper semis. So a little ways away if that happens. And speaking of the matchups, let's go ahead and pull up the bracket. Obviously, it's a double elimination through and through. There's no points. That's out the window. It's straight up double elimination all the way through with 8 teams. Well, I guess we'll just start top to bottom and kind of run through them quickly. M80 SR. SR squeaking into the playoffs, excited, and then they meet M80 first. Do you think that's for the best, or do you think they would have preferred anybody else?
That's a good question. I I'm looking at the bracket, and honestly, like, I think this is a pretty decent matchup for Shopify in a sense that M80 out of all the teams might be the most buttoned up, right? Like, if
Yeah,
maybe the guard would be that team. Like, you could look at their VODs and be like, okay, this is what they're trying to accomplish. And, like they might go for this play off of that, but it's always going to feel like a buttoned up play when you play them.
yeah,
And Vanity typically has good reads in those scenarios. And I think with a couple weeks to game plan, I think Shopify could be in a good spot in that best of three. I mean, they did already beat them in
yeah.
stage two.
Yeah, and when I was talking to some of the players, Moose, I got to talk to Vanity again, and I was just like, when you play OR and you play Mad Lions, it feels like you guys are playing down to them. What is it? Do you feel like you play up to teams like M80 and the Guard? He's like, yeah, absolutely. Like, it's different for us for some reason mentally to go up against like an OR or a DSG, and then we go up against like an M80 Guard. We feel like we're back where we should be in a weird like mental kind of check. So I feel like playing M80 first hopefully should set them in the right path, win or lose, to be like, okay, like we can do that, and this is what we need to work on.
I agree. I think it's the first time that like, this SR team is going to have some time to take a breather and come into this
Mm,
feeling like an actual team, like Vanity has had some time to gel with the players. And this is what Shopify will truly be, right? As a team. I feel like what we're gonna see in the playoffs is a good barometer for Shopify, right? They looked really bad in split one, kind of faltered at the finish line in a couple of those series. They made the change, didn't really have enough time to implement Vanity, and they're finally gelling really well if you look at their results. So I think I agree with you. I think M81 seed, obviously they're playing the 8 seed. You would think they're going to
yeah.
steamroll them. It's not that simple. I think this game has a lot of hidden little details in it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as we mentioned, Vanity loves a challenge and he's got one out of the gate. Oxygen G2 is the game that's gonna follow on the 31st. And man, Redux, Rustin in another team that kind of like Shopify needed some time to get these pieces in and get them comfortable. And now that you've seen Redux on Duelist and you've seen Rustin kind of settle in, what do you think about them and playing an 05 G2 through split two right away?
Yeah, I'm worried for G2 obviously, right? Like yeah, they play second in split 1. They don't get a single win in split
Yeah.
2. Coming into playoffs, they're playing this Oxygen team that's a total wild card in my eyes. Like the average age on that squad has to be so low, and Bonkar is just giving them these goat strats, these pocket strats,
Yep.
and they're just a very dangerous team. For G2, who typically relies on like a lot of probably anti-play from Shaz, it might be one of the more difficult opponents in this entire bracket in my eyes. Like
Yeah.
this is not a good matchup for G2, but that doesn't mean that G2 can't win, right? Like I think
Totally.
again, it's the same story as Shopify, right? After split 1, G2 obviously made that super deep run. They placed second. They wanted to take time off. They were exhausted from that grind. So they took time off. Split 2 started. They got like no practice. They weren't even prepared to play split 2, but they had already qualified for playoffs. So who the F cares, right? Like and then now that they're 0 and 5, they're probably like reinvigorated, wanted to
Yeah.
practice again, I guess a little bit harder. They had a couple weeks now after the split's over. And this could be a very different G2. They could bust out some comps that are totally different than the ones we saw in
That's
stage
true.
2.
And I think the hardest part for them is balancing time on self and time for Oxygen because Oxygen have what 2 matches with Redux and Rustin in. You don't know if they're going to change anything. I'm sure Bonkar's thinking about it. And G2 is like, well, how much time do we have to put into ourselves to get where we want? And I think that's the nice thing. The one advantage G2 has is that experience in Shaz, Dapper,
Yeah.
right? These players who've been there, done that, that understand playoff grind where Auction might not, right? Maybe Bonkar does and Mitch does, but you're also working with younger kids who, yeah, they want to win and they have the drive to win, but the grind is so fresh in a sense to them that it's like, okay, there's a lot to remember, right? Anti strat and focusing on yourselves. And so I'm curious to see that kind of balance. And we might just see two teams just focus on each other in the first match, like like you focus on themselves, excuse me,
Yeah, yeah.
and maybe kind of be more reactive and not as hard as a counterplay. I'm sure it'd be a bit obvious if we see any counterplay, but I feel like it's just going to be two teams that are going to be working on themselves coming into this.
I tend to agree. Typically, Shaz is like an anti-shredder, but when you have 2 weeks like this
Yeah,
to really change things up, you can't really rely on anti-shredding from stage
yeah,
2. It's just too far away, right? Like, what if the other team comp changes, or what if they
yeah.
have plays off of the things in stage 2? So your anti-shredding is literally hurting you instead of helping you, right? It's just yeah, I agree. They're gonna be focusing on themselves probably in this game.
Should be a fire matchup. Like all these matchups are gonna be fire. So I need to stop saying it. But Redux playoff debut, Scuba, Mitch, right? And then obviously Shazam, Dapper. They know what it takes. The guard phase. You've said it once, and I've repeated it to the players. The guard don't lose after a break, and there's been a break, and
Yes.
it's been a decent one at that. And their first opponent is FaZe. And when I was talking to the guys, I'm like, "You guys know how to beat FaZe, don't you? They're 4-0 against them in historics, 2-0 in challengers. I mean, they just have their number."
Yeah, I mean, like, I think out of all the games in the playoffs, this one is just the most veg. Like, this is just I don't know. It's nothing against FaZe. It's nothing against FaZe, because I actually think FaZe is an insane team and they can make a lower bracket run, but like you said, there's something about this guard team after a
Yeah,
break where you don't know what they're gonna do, you don't know what they've been cooking. But we all know they've been grinding. We all know they've been
absolutely.
cooking up strats and that they're coming into this game and they're gonna have some crazy pocket strats, some insane ult plays, and their pistols are always insane. Like, watching the guard play is like it's like a work of art. Like, these guys just like
Yep.
craft stuff in Valoplant all day. I swear to God, like
And
everything
on
they
top of
do
that,
just
like
seems perfect.
not only do they have unreal strats, but I think they're one of the most versatile mid-round adjusting teams in challengers, which maybe is a reach, but watching them, it's like they flow like water. Like the way they all communicate, you can kind of tell how quick they react to things. Like, sure, they've been together for a while. I'm sure some of that's protocols, but some of it's got to be on the fly, like reacting and being super versatile. And I think that's one of the biggest strengths.
Dude.
Not only is like, how do you get a read on this team? Like, what do you do?
Yeah, so going into that point you just made, when I was working the Tarek Ludwig Invitational, I talked a lot with Josh and Valen and a couple other players on the guard, and I'm trying to remember, like maybe Jonah. And they were telling me about Josh's impact and what he's doing different than MC, because I was very curious, like,
Mm,
oh, like what's so different, right? Like, because they were giving Josh a lot of praise, and I know
yeah,
MC is a great coach, so I was like, huh, what's Josh doing? And apparently he really worked hard on working on their mid rounding and mid gaming using like
there we
his
go.
CS:GO fundamentals. And I was watching them throughout that tournament, and their post plans on Ascent, like the way they were thinking things through on the fly, because you got to keep in mind, like, it's not like you're always in a perfect 5-on-5 with the same
Yeah,
exact util, right? Just the way they play, like 3-on-4s and 4-on-2s, and like these weird scenarios where you can't have true preparation for, but you can have ideas and you can be quick to react to those ideas. And you
mm.
can tell Guard has thought through a lot of these things already.
That match, yeah, still watch. I would watch for the guards domination. Is probably what you watch for in
Yeah.
that one to see what kind of guard you're going to get throughout playoffs.
Res-
I want FaZe to do
respectfully,
well, but
face.
respectfully. Yeah, we'll be watching respectfully. Because, yeah, it's going to be tough. FaZe are fighting an uphill battle. And finally, the final match of round one of upper quarters is Moist TSM. Now, this one, Moist are looking so good. TSM, they're kind of a roller coaster at the moment. Beating Shopify, close against M80, owned by Oxygen, losing to Turtle Troop. I don't know how to get a read on them.
Yeah. It's like
And the weird role thing too
it
that's kind of going on.
part of me thinks that this could be like a trap game for Moist,
Mm,
right? Like they a little bit overlook them, and because I've seen TSM look so good. But then,
hmm
like you're saying, it's been a roller coaster. Like, stage 2 is kinda weird with TSM, the way they lost to M80, 2-1, right? Fair enough,
Yep.
fair enough. and then they just get blanked by Oxygen. There's the Turtle Troop, and you're kind of questioning like, "Oh, I thought maybe you would win like at least one of those," and
Yeah,
I don't know where to peg them now, like, as a team, like, in challengers, actually, they're kind of a wild card as far as
very true.
what I think of them. Whereas, like, Oxygen's a wild card regarding their talent and how they play the game, but I think they're an insane team that no one wants to play against. TSM is, like, one of those teams that they could beat Moist or they could just get blown out 0-2, and I'm not
Mm.
really sure.
Yeah, it's an interesting feeling. They're one of the only teams where they'll have a player like Seven play Jet throughout Split 2, and then on maps they want him to play Cypher, he plays Cypher. So they have a duelist Sentinel split, and then they have Corey who plays Raze on Raze maps or Sova on non-Raze maps. It's such a because what other duelist in the world gets told go up on Jet at this crazy pace and then hop on Cypher and AFK on a cam? It's such a weird balance.
Bro, I don't know, man. They're cooking over there. They have Corey on,
They're
like,
doing
Gecko and
something.
stuff,
Yeah.
like, they're doing crazy stuff over there. But, honestly, a lot of it looks it's weird, like, they look really good in some halves, and
Yeah.
then in the same map, the next half will happen, and they'll look terrible. And they can't recover mentally when they start losing is what I've noticed. I
Mm.
think that a lot of the problems with TSM might stem from mental stuff, like, within the game and maybe
That would make sense.
communication. Because when they win, I swear to God, they just, like, snowball, and it but when they lose, it's the same thing, it, like, avalanches down, and they just get blown out, and
Yeah.
I don't know what that's all about.
The meta is so open right now. We could get double duels comps. I've seen like not in challenge, but I've seen some teams break out triple senti in these recent tournaments that have been going on. So like there's some gaps in this meta because it's more open now. I don't think there's any, agents that you go, that's a must need on my team. It feels like we're in the most open meta currently. It's a team
Yeah.
fight meta, but it's a whatever you're comfortable with kind of meta, which I think is going to lead into playoffs. Some interest like Harbor Viper on Haven's been a thing going on in Americas. I'm sure we'll see that here.
Yeah, then maybe TSM did just spread themselves a little bit too thin by doing a lot of those things, because I agree, I
Yeah.
think they could look really good in double duelist comps, like with Corey obviously
Hmm.
running one of the duelists, or they can look really good, where they run, like, Harbor comps where Corey's
Yep.
playing a Gecko, or they've run no duelist comps where
Yeah,
Corey's
they've
playing
done some
Sova,
things.
and it's like, bro, they are really, like, going all over the place with their comps, and it has to be so difficult as far as just where you are as a player in a hit,
Yeah.
right? People don't really think of that. Like the duelist goes in first, and then the flash initiator might be right behind them, and then next is the info gathering initiator, and then next is the controller, and then there's a lurker sentinel somewhere else. But if you're just constantly just switching roles from map to map,
Oh
and
man.
there's just no consistency in how you take fights, it's gonna cause a lot of variance, I feel like.
Yeah, and it kind of trickles down to now your spacing's off, now your order of trading's off, and as you said, it's gonna feel clunky. It's gonna feel like the
Yeah.
gears are kind of grinding in opposite directions. We'll see if TSM can clean it up. It's unfortunately they have to play first, but that's kind of the bed that got laid in front of them. So we'll see if they can do it. So those are all the matches. Now we get to do the fun part and do some predictions. Sean, I do just want to let you know I tallied the predictions through Split 2. You ended with
Don't say it.
19 out of 30. Oh,
Don't say it.
and I ended with 20. I'm sorry.
No.
Look, you gonna beat me in playoffs, okay? Double or nothing. All right. Loser still gets that tattoo we talked about. We'll do it. It's okay. We'll still make it happen. That's okay. But yeah, we're gonna do predictions. It looked like I was a prediction king by one map, and that was because I think I was looking at it. I predicted like FaZe to win a match they shouldn't have. And that was my golden goose. So it doesn't
Oh,
make me better; it just makes me more lucky. So let's do our playoffs ones. We'll start at the top. M80 Shopify. I'm hard pressed not to take M80 here, Sean. I'm sorry.
I I mean, this is actually really hard for me. I know that I have bias, obviously, I'm on Shopify. I still think this is like a close to 50-50 game, and I'm gonna take
Mm,
Shopify just to pick the opposite of you. And I
sure.
actually do have a lot of faith in Shopify with 2 weeks of preparation, Vanity at the helm. Like, I
Yeah.
really do. They played M80 well the first time around, which goes to show they know how to prep against this team. and not many teams know how to prep against the M80. It's very
Yeah.
difficult because there's a lot of different looks they give, and that's where Vanity's experience probably really comes into play. Um, it's not gonna be easy though, because M80 has 2 weeks to craft stuff, right, and change their stuff, and it's not gonna be as anti-strat heavy maybe as it was in stage 2. It's gonna
Mhm.
be more on Shopify to have a good game themselves, right, as opposed to anti-stratting, which makes this a little bit of a risky pick by me, I'm not gonna lie, but I'm still going Shopify.
I respect it. I'll go M80. Oxygen G2. This one, you take me back to split one, end of split one, and you say Oxygen versus G2. Who are you picking, Keith? I'm picking G2 every time, no question. I'm conflicted at this point because, as you said, time off. G2 are going to be putting in the work. They're going to be both putting time probably into themselves, not looking at the other team too much. But I still don't feel comfortable picking G2 100%.
I totally understand that. I This is definitely one of the harder ones to predict because, yeah, you would think G2 can play better, but you really don't have a lot of reason to think that.
Yeah.
Like, you're just
Yeah.
going off of kind of name value and what happened a few months ago, and it hasn't happened for a long time, but you think the stars are gonna align, and, like, with the extra couple weeks of practice, it should happen again. And
Yeah.
I also feel that same vibe, like, it's it's very hard to pick against G2 here, but honestly, I'm gonna do it. I'm picking Oxygen in this game.
Ooh.
I have a lot of faith in this Oxygen team, and it's one of those games where I think honestly, if G2 won like 2 games in Split 2, just the mental pressure alone on
Mm.
Oxygen would cause me to pick G2. But because G2 went 0-5, I think Oxygen is gonna come into this game fresh out of their high school classes, dude. These guys are all like 16 years old. They're gonna be so confident that they're just gonna peak everything. Like, they're gonna peak
Yeah.
everything, and they're not gonna have any fear in this game. But if G2
Yeah.
starts well, like, man, if G2, like, steals that first map, I think Oxygen could potentially crumble just because of the lack of experience.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the big factor is experience to me. So against my better judgment, I will add I'm probably making a mistake here. I'm going to pick G2, um, just on that experience card, and we'll see if it pays off. The guard phase, man, we kind of both. I think we're both on the same wavelength here, where nobody beats the guard after a break, and respectfully not phase. So
Respectfully Respectfully, the guard is winning this game, and, I'm already preemptively apologizing for when Phase 2 owes them, and all of the guard fans are super mad at us for jinxing them.
please don't be mad at us, but we're going guard. So that's kind of
Yeah.
we'll stay on the same page for this one. And then Moist TSM, you did try to convince me that TSM could pull it back. They've looked great, but it's kind of the opposite of G2 fact here with Moist. A 5-0 split that makes it hard not to pick them.
Dude, it makes it so yeah, I don't think I'm taking anyone over Moist right now. I just don't. They're individual players. I think they might have looking across the bracket, you would argue maybe like M80 or like yeah, I'd say only M80 could have them beat for, like, skill across the entire roster. Like, I
Mm,
watched Moist, and they just fry people. Like, all of the players just destroy people. They're not, like, the most polished as far as, like, executes or strats compared
yeah,
to some of these other teams in the bracket, but, man, can those guys aim. Like, their form is always insane. They're
yeah,
grinders through and through, and this is not a game that I think TSM can dominate. Like they just can't. It's going to be a very hard fought battle if TSM wins, and it's likely going to be easy for Moist unless they have some kind of weird lapse. So I'm picking
yeah.
Moist.
I'm gonna pick Moist as well. Also, a little note on that: they are boot camping. So they
Oh
are
shit.
together for the first time. So we might get that boot camp buff out of Moist. Man, all I can know for sure, because this is where my brain's kind of at, is these playoffs are going to be crazy. We're going to see new comps. We're going to see teams trying to take new strikes at maps. We're probably going to see some teams change their veto and their perma's now in. I can only imagine what's going to happen, and I can't wait. And I hope everybody is excited. That's the show. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to follow Sean Gares and myself on our socials. Let us know what you think about our predictions. We kind of went against each other, so we'll see who pans out on top. And don't forget to follow Knightsarena to stay update on everything Challengers. And the biggest game of NA Challengers is coming up right now. It's playoffs. Get excited.